What if I told you that one of the greatest animated shows ever made is secretly one of the most historically literate pieces of media in the last 20 years? I'm not talking about a documentary. I'm not talking about a prestige HBO drama. I'm talking about a cartoon that aired on Nickelodeon. Avatar, The Last Airbender didn't just borrow loosely from Asian cultures for aesthetic flavor. The creators, Brian Konietzko and Michael Dante Di Martino, built a world so deeply rooted in real history that when you start pulling at the threads, you uncover parallels to imperial expansion, cultural genocide, colonialism, and resistance movements that mirror events our actual world lived through. And the scary part? Most of us watched this as kids and had no idea. So today we're breaking down exactly how the four nations of Avatar map onto real civilizations, real conflicts, and real human stories. And once you see it, you will never watch this show the same way again. Let's start with the most obvious and arguably the most chilling parallel in the entire series. The Fire Nation. On the surface, the Fire Nation is the villain of the story. They're an industrialized, militaristic island nation that launches a 100-year war of conquest against the rest of the world. They believe their civilization is superior, and they frame their invasion as a mission to share their greatness. Sound familiar? It should, because the Fire Nation is heavily modeled on Imperial Japan, specifically Japan during the Meiji Restoration and its expansion leading into World War II. Think about it. Japan underwent rapid industrialization in the late 1800s, transforming from a feudal society into a modern military power in just a few decades. The Fire Nation mirrors this exactly. They have factories, warships made of steel, and industrial infrastructure that no other nation in Avatar's world can match. Japan's imperial ideology, known as Hakko Ichiu, or 8 corners of the world under one roof, promoted the idea that Japanese expansion was a divine mission to unify and civilize Asia. Fire Lord Sozin says almost the exact same thing when he tells Roku that the Fire Nation's prosperity is something that should be shared with the world, even if it has to be shared by force. But it goes deeper than ideology. The Fire Nation's architecture draws from Japanese pagoda styles. Their armor resembles samurai-era designs blended with later imperial military uniforms. The top-knot hairstyles, the emphasis on honor, the rigid social hierarchy, all of it points directly to Japanese cultural history. Even the Fire Nation's relationship with its colonies in the Earth Kingdom mirrors Japan's occupation of Manchuria and Korea, where the occupying force set up puppet governments, extracted resources, and suppressed local culture. The show doesn't shy away from showing how propaganda works either. Remember the episode where Aang goes to a Fire Nation school? The children are taught a completely fabricated version of history where the Fire Nation is the hero and the air nomads were a military threat. That is textbook imperial revisionism, and it is exactly what happened in Japanese schools during and after the war. This isn't surface-level inspiration, this is studied, intentional historical storytelling. Now let's cross the sea to the Earth Kingdom, the largest and most diverse of the four nations. The Earth Kingdom is primarily based on China, and more specifically, on China during the Qing Dynasty, the last imperial dynasty that ruled from 1644 to 1912. The parallels are everywhere. Ba Sing Se, the Earth Kingdom's capital, is a direct reflection of Beijing. The name itself is a play on the Mandarin word for Beijing, which translates loosely to impenetrable city. Ba Sing Se has massive walls separating it into rings based on social class, with the poorest citizens on the outside and the elite near the palace. This mirrors the structure of the Forbidden City and the walled districts of Imperial Beijing almost perfectly. But the cultural parallels go even further. The Dai Li, the secret police of Ba Sing Se, who operate in the shadows and control information, are named after and inspired by the real Dai Li, who was the head of Chiang Kai-shek's secret police during the Republic of China era. The real Dai Li was known as China's Himmler for his brutal surveillance tactics and his willingness to suppress dissent at any cost. In the show, the Dai Li literally brainwash citizens who talk about the war, keeping the population ignorant and compliant. It's a haunting parallel to real authoritarian information control. The Earth Kingdom's vast size and internal divisions also reflect China's historical struggle with regional fragmentation. Throughout the Qing dynasty, China dealt with warlords, regional uprisings like the Taiping Rebellion, and the challenge of governing an enormous, ethnically diverse territory. The Earth Kingdom has the same problem. It's technically one nation, but its regions operate semi-independently, and when the central government weakens, chaos follows. We see this play out in both the original series and The Legend of Korra. The show captures something essential about Chinese history: that size and endurance don't equal unity, and that the greatest threats to a massive kingdom often come from within. Now let's head to the poles. The water tribes, both the northern and southern, draw their inspiration primarily from Inuit and broader indigenous Arctic cultures, including Yupik, Cyreniki, and other circumpolar peoples. This is visible immediately in the visual design. The water tribe members wear parkas lined with fur, live in structures made of ice and animal hides, travel by canoe and on the backs of animals adapted to frozen environments, and their entire way of life is built around coexisting with an extreme landscape. Their spiritual connection to the moon and ocean spirits reflects the deep animistic traditions of many Arctic indigenous cultures, where the natural world is not just a resource, but a living, sacred presence. But the historical parallels become more painful when you look at what happens to the Southern Water Tribe. At the start of the series, the Southern Water Tribe has been devastated. Its waterbenders have been systematically captured and removed by the Fire Nation over the course of decades, leaving behind a tiny, struggling community that has lost much of its cultural knowledge and identity. This directly mirrors the real-world history of colonial powers systematically dismantling indigenous communities. Think about the residential school systems in Canada and the United States, where indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families, forbidden from speaking their languages, and stripped of their cultural identity. Think about how colonial governments targeted spiritual leaders and knowledge keepers specifically, because they understood that destroying cultural memory was the most efficient path to control. Katara's grandmother, Gran, serves as the last living link to old Southern Water Tribe traditions. She's a carrier of oral history in a community that has been deliberately severed from its past. That is not a fantasy trope. That is the lived experience of countless indigenous elders around the real world. The show treats this with genuine respect, and it's one of the reasons Avatar resonates so deeply with audiences from indigenous backgrounds. And then there are the Air Nomads, the nation that exists mostly as a ghost in Avatar's story. The Air Nomads are modeled primarily on Tibetan Buddhist monks and, to a lesser extent, on aspects of Hindu and Shaolin monastic traditions. The air temples are perched on remote mountaintops, just like real Tibetan monasteries such as the Potala Palace in Lhasa or the famous Tiger's Nest in Bhutan. The air nomads practice detachment from worldly possessions, meditation, and vegetarianism, all core elements of Tibetan Buddhist monastic life. Their arrow tattoos, earned through mastering airbending, parallel the tradition of spiritual markings and the rigorous training that monks undergo over years of disciplined practice. Aang's struggle throughout the series with the concept of letting go of earthly attachments to access the avatar state is essentially a dramatization of the Buddhist path to enlightenment. But here's where the history becomes devastating. The genocide of the air nomads by the Fire Nation is a direct parallel to the Chinese invasion and occupation of Tibet beginning in 1950. The Chinese government destroyed thousands of monasteries, killed or displaced monks and nuns, and attempted to systematically erase Tibetan Buddhist culture. The Dalai Lama was forced into exile, just as Aang is, in a sense, the last survivor of a destroyed civilization forced to carry its legacy alone. The show made the deliberate choice to depict an entire culture wiped out. Not threatened, not weakened, erased. And they gave that weight to a children's show because they understood that this is something that actually happens in our world. Cultures are destroyed, people are lost, and the survivors carry an impossible burden. Aang's grief when he finds monk Gyatso's remains at the Southern Air Temple is one of the most powerful moments in the entire series, and it hits so hard because it's rooted in real, documented tragedy. When you zoom out and look at all four nations together, what you see is not just cultural window dressing. You see a complete geopolitical ecosystem modeled on real power dynamics from the 19th and 20th centuries. The Fire Nation's industrialized expansion mirrors Imperial Japan and, more broadly, the patterns of any imperial power that uses technological superiority to justify conquest. The Earth Kingdom's slow bureaucratic collapse under external pressure mirrors Qing China's century of humiliation. The water tribe's devastation parallels the colonial erasure of indigenous peoples across the Arctic and beyond. And the air nomads' genocide reflects Tibet and, honestly, any culture that has been targeted for total destruction throughout history. The genius of Avatar is that it doesn't simplify these dynamics. The Fire Nation isn't just evil for the sake of being evil. We meet Fire Nation citizens who are kind, who are conflicted, who have been lied to by their own government. We see that imperialism damages the aggressor's culture too, not just the victims. Zuko's entire arc is about a young man raised inside the imperial machine who has to dismantle the propaganda he was raised on and choose a different path. That is a story about de-radicalization, and it is told with more nuance in this animated series than in most adult dramas. The show also understands that liberation isn't simple. Defeating the Fire Lord doesn't instantly fix the Earth Kingdom's corruption or rebuild the Southern Water Tribe's lost traditions or bring back the Air Nomads. Recovery from imperialism takes generations, and the legend of Korra actually explores those messy after-effects in ways that are just as historically grounded. So the next time someone dismisses Avatar, The Last Airbender, as just a kids' show, you can tell them that it contains more thoughtful historical commentary than most things with a TV May rating. The creators didn't just Google some Asian architecture and call it a day. They studied history. They hired cultural consultants. They treated their source material with care and intelligence, and the result is a show that teaches real lessons about power, propaganda, cultural destruction, and resilience, all wrapped in one of the most entertaining stories ever animated. I'd love to hear from you. Which nation's real-world parallels surprised you the most? Did I miss any connections you've noticed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I genuinely love hearing what this community brings to the conversation. If this video taught you something new or made you want to re-watch Avatar for the 100th time, hit that like button. It really does help the channel more than you'd think. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We do deep dives like this all the time, pulling apart the history and culture hiding inside the stories you already love. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.